Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Laurie Smith on Blog Talk Radio. Good evening. It is 9:30 p.m. here in Calgary, Alberta, Wednesday night, September 22nd. This is Child Abuse Prevention and Human Rights Abuse Prevention is Up to Us. It's a 30-minute live internet streaming radio broadcast from blogtalkradio.com, and the chat room is open if anybody would like to sit in there. I popped a link into the chat, and I wanted to continue talking about the different types of abuse, of child abuse, whether it's child physical abuse, verbal, psychological, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, and neglect, and whatnot, from a website that I ran across a while back, and it's just an awesome website, and it's called the Child Abuse Survivor Monument. It's www.irvingstudios.com, and Michael C. Irving, he's a psychotherapist, he's a sculptor, and he's a survivor of child abuse, and he's created this website as well as the Child Abuse Survivor Monument in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And it's been a few years now since they dedicated this monument to all victims and survivors of child abuse, and it's just an awesome website. I hope you will go check it out. www.irvingstudios.com, IRVINGSTUDIOS.com, irvingstudios.com. And that's his website. And there's so much good information on there for survivors, as well as just anyone who's looking for information on child abuse and about the monument and whatnot. Just great information there. Lots of resources and self-care, the participants who took part in the actual monument, and just everything on there. So it's a great website. I hope you will check it out. And I'm not before we get started, I'm not a professional counselor or therapist. I don't hold any certificates in those areas. I'm just a private citizen paying to do my own blog talk shows. And I just want to be one more voice out there. That's why I'm doing these shows. I just want to be one more voice to say we need to stop child abuse and stand up and say, child abuse is wrong and we need to stop it. And so, you have to listen at your own discretion. All the topics of abuse are very sensitive. A lot of people find them just, very discouraging to listen to. So if you think the topic might bother you or cause you to be uncomfortable, you have to listen at your own discretion and turn the show off, right? Ultimately you would know what's good for you to listen to. And young people under the age of 18, I ask that you have permission to listen to my shows, right? There's a lot of adult content on my shows, and I'm all about protecting children. So you need to have permission to listen to my shows. I would hope that you have somebody to listen to them with you, just to make sure that it's something that you should be listening to, and then they can help you make that decision, right? And so we'll get right into this article here. I wanted to look at this website. It is the topic for tonight is what is sexual abuse. We already talked about the physical abuse, child neglect. Actually, last Monday night we covered child neglect, and now I want to look at the section that they have here about sexual abuse. And they say, what is sexual abuse? And he says here, child sexual abuse is not about sex. And then he asks the question, if I hit you with a rolling pin, could we call it baking? So I really like that, because I was beaten with a rolling pin one time, and I know it certainly wasn't baking. That's the thing. This is absolutely horrific. Children suffering, at the hands of an adult or caregiver or child sexual predator, being, mistreated and abused and sexually abused, and it's not right. It's got to stop. 1 in 3 girls, 1 in 6 boys will be abused sexually under the age of 18. Now, that's stats everywhere you look. And pretty much that's 1 in 3 or 4 girls, 1 in 6 or 7 boys, just depending on where you're looking. But we know that abuse is underreported, so that's a sad fact. It's probably more than that, and that's whether they're involved with someone who's abusing them, whether it's unwanted sexual touching or molestation or rape. 1 in 3 girls, 1 in 6 boys. So this is horrible. It says it's hard to talk about sexual abuse, but we need to. I'm reading right from the page here. Sexual abuse includes involving a child in acts such as, they list them off: fondling, touching a child in sexual ways, getting the child to touch the adult inappropriately, oral sex, inserting fingers or objects or penis into the vagina or anus, exposing oneself, allowing a child to watch pornography, and involving a child in pornography or prostitution, right? Child sexual abuse is an abuse of power and trust. It is manipulating or forcing a child to service a sick adult. And you know several people who were sexually abused as a child, whether you know it or not. It is more common than you think. So in other words, that's the 1 in 3 girls, 1 in 6 boys. Chances are everybody knows someone who's been sexually abused, because 1 in 3 girls, 1 in 6 boys will have been abused under the age of 18 sexually. So, if you're in a room with 3 girls, chances are one of you will have been abused sexually as a child and under the age of 18. And if you're in a room with 6 men, one of you will have been abused as a child under the age of 18 or under. It says the trauma of child sexual abuse is real and memories can be recovered inside and outside of therapy. It says the trauma of sexual abuse is profound and pervasive, and child sexual abuse changes everything forever. And that's the truth. Child sexual abuse is a crime. It is very damaging to the soul and or psyche of the child and has long-term, often permanent effects on the adult. And most childhood sexual abuse is committed by someone known to and often related with the child. And there are normally severe threats associated to disclosure. So it says words cannot describe. Well, they did, do some studies, and they did come up with the fact that 90 to 95% of all abuse that children have to go through is all perpetrated by a family member or a very close relative, or a distant relative, or a friend who's considered to be family, right? Somebody the child knows and trusts, and who has met and, who trusts, right? And it's because it's wherever the child is. If you can imagine, child abuse takes place where the children are. Where are the children most of the time? At home. Or daycare, being watched by somebody, babysitters, that's where the child is. That's where the child sexual abuse is going to happen. So whether it's in the home or, a babysitter's or a family member who's looking after the child, or daycare, you name it, schools, absolutely horrible. It says words cannot describe. And then it says, discussion, what is sexual abuse? It says brainstorming. Sexual abuse often takes the form of an adult misleading and threatening a child. There is betrayal and abuse of power and trust, stolen innocence, violation, isolation, control, manipulation, secrecy. Abused people may feel fear, pain, rage, despair, brokenness, humiliation, longing, disappointment, sadness, guilt, and shame. Sexual abuse results in a lack of trust. Survivors and witnesses live in fear, and they do not have a voice. And that's just the whole thing, so many survivors of any type of abuse, it's so harmful and so hurtful that many survivors will not come forward, and also due to the fact that the abuser might still be living, and they just don't want to, maybe out of fear for their lives, don't want to disclose the abuse. And so many times they feel they wouldn't be believed anyway, even if they did speak out and actually, tell someone about the abuse that they suffered as a child, or a child, might who's being abused now would go to an adult, and the adult would say, whoever this person was would be like, well, you're just making this up or whatever, right? Quite often that's the case, especially to do surrounding sexual abuse, because many people, so many parents and family members don't want to deal with it, because it's generally a family member. So, if it's the mother abusing the child, or the father abusing the child, or let's say it's an aunt or uncle or a cousin or something, no one wants to confront that other family member, right? They'd rather just let it keep going on. So they just say, oh, you're just making this up, and, you better stop telling lies, and blah, 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 even though the child is telling the truth. And even if the family members know a lot of times that the abuse is happening, because it may have happened to them as well by the same abuser, they don't want to rock the boat because it's the family. See, and the family ties are pretty strong. That whole codependency garbage, it's all about the abuser's needs, not about the children's needs. And other children can be abusers. Other children do sexually abuse other children. So, it's absolutely horrible. And if a child comes to you and tells you that they're being abused in any way, you have to believe them, because children do not make this stuff up. It's too horrific. It's too horrible. It's too sad. And so many times, I think, survivors, especially of child sexual abuse, they take on this guilt as if it's their fault, because they were probably told, well, if you wanted this as much as I did, or you're the reason why I did this because it's your fault. The abuser will make the child feel that it is their fault, or that they had something to do with initiating the sexual abuse, right? And that's how they get them to stay silent. It's just another form of manipulation is what it is. And so it's very sad, because the guilt and the shame actually lies on the abuser, not with the child. And the children's never the children are not at fault, and children are actually abuse is never a child's fault. It is always the abuser's fault, because abuse is a choice, and people choose to abuse. They choose to do what they do, and how, why we would take on the shame and the guilt for something that we had no control over, I just don't know, but we do as survivors quite often do that. And it's just because it's a whole psychological, wearing down of a child, and then later on they have to try to overcome that as adults, right? So it's very, very hard. This website is a great website for survivors. There's lots of information on there, coping information, and just tons and tons of resources on there. I'm on here quite a bit. And so, it's very, very sad. So they live in fear. Survivors and witnesses live in fear. They do not have a voice. And quite often, if the abuser is still alive, they might be threatening people's lives, saying, if you tell anything, I'll kill you, or I'll kill the pets, or I'll kill the other children in the home, or I'll kill the other partner, the parent, or whatever. This is the thing. Abusers are horrible, mean, manipulative people. They will say anything to be able to continue to get away with what they did, and to maybe even be able to continue to get away with it, right? So it says sexual abuse may be denied by the person themselves as well as their family and community. So that's the problem. See, the family and even the community don't want to deal with this. No one wants to say, even if they knew it was true, that Uncle so-and-so or Aunt so-and-so was abusing their child or someone else in the family, another child. No one wants to see Aunt Joe or, Aunt Jane and Uncle Joe go to jail and do prison time, see? There's this whole, but we love Aunt and Uncle. We don't want them to go to jail, because who's going to, cook the steaks at the summer barbecue? You know what I mean? This is how sick and sad and wrong this is, And it's often just pushed out because no one wants to deal with it within the family, because family ties are even to abusers. You know what I mean? A lot of times the other parent will look the other way, or even engage in some of this, child sexual abuse, right? One parent will abuse the child, and then the other parent will get involved just because they're told to, or they feel like maybe they should so that they won't be abused, or there's all kinds of really sick, disgusting things happening out there. It's all very psychologically disgraceful and disgusting, but we know it's happening. And it's very, very sad and extremely hard on the children, and they don't deserve it. You know what I mean? This is not something that, how could a child be to blame for this? This is the abuser's fault in every way. And the family and the community just deny, shove their heads in the sand and don't want to deal with it. So there's often a strong reluctance to accept the truth about sexual abuse. It often proves easier to blame the child rather than the perpetrator. See, so they say, well, if you weren't this or you weren't that, or it's your fault, or whatever. This is always the case. Well, not always, but quite often. I'm sure there are some parents that do believe children when they tell them, if they disclose that they're being abused, and that's great. But there's some that, and it's sad. It's very, very sad. So this is an act that devastates on many levels and often proves to be a life sentence for the victim. Survivors often feel self-blame and blamed by their community. They need to escape, to hide from them. They may become self-destructive or suicidal. And that's with any kind of abuse, really, whether it's just child physical abuse, neglect, verbal, emotional, psychological abuse. It's very, very hard on children, and sometimes they just can't make it, so they feel that they can't open, or that they need to feel something. Sometimes they just feel so needing, so they do the suffering, right? And then sometimes they feel too much, and then they self-injure, and then there's the whole issue with suicide. And that's sad. That is very, very sad. One of my brothers committed suicide at the age of 33, and my other brother died of a drug overdose at the age of 43, and nobody would have known about their lives had I not spoken up. No one would have known what happened to them as children had I not stood up and broke the silence and used my voice to speak out against the abuse we suffered in our home. So, this is the thing. A lot of times it's a life sentence for survivors, for the victims and survivors, and they just never do tell anybody, and they never reach out and get any help. And this is sad because it was never their fault in the first place. They deserve to heal. They deserve to have a good life. Quite often they don't, and so many people and so many children actually, try to commit suicide or do commit suicide because of this. And it's very, very sad. That's why we have to stop child abuse, right? And it's emergency. It's an emergency. Yeah, it's crucial. We will lose so many children tonight from abuse. So many children tonight killed at the hands of their parents and caregivers. And some of the doctors will rule it accident. Some will rule it abuse. But we'll lose so many tonight, and then again tomorrow night, the next night, and the next. And then if they're not killed, they're just being abused horrifically. If they survive it, they'll have to keep going through it every night. Until they can get away from their abusers, right? And it's very, very sad. It says, listen to your child. Trust your child. Don't judge or criticize. Be aware that sexual abuse can happen to you or your child. And children may not be aware that they are being sexually abused, so don't close your eyes. Be aware what is normal sexual play between children. So these are the kind of things that parents need to really be alerted to. If your child is doing, or your children are doing things that are just way beyond what they should know, sexual behaviors, playing and doing things that there's no possible way that they could even know what that is, because they shouldn't have seen it, they shouldn't have been exposed to it. Something's going on, right? Because children don't children at some point become very curious about their bodies and curious about other people's bodies, and that's fine. They're just discovering, right? But not when they're doing these precocious kind of sexual acts and behaviors, right? That's something that they would have seen or learned, right? So that's something that parents can. Sometimes parents think that when their kids are acting sexy, they think it's funny, they think it's cute. But you really have to you have to just wonder if they're watching or what they're doing and to be acting and behaving that way, right? So you have to watch how much, what kind of programs your children are watching on TV. Make sure that they're not being abused or subjected to pornography. Children should be allowed to be children and grow up and discover their own sexuality on their own. You know what I mean? And find out who they are on their own. They shouldn't be forced as young children to be adults. You know what I mean? It's not normal, right? Children are children, and they should be allowed to grow up and be as innocent as possible until they so choose a time when they decide that it's time for them to grow up and explore and find out who they are, and their own sexuality, and become comfortable with it, instead of exposing them ahead of time. They don't need that. Children should just be allowed to be children. And so sexual abuse is part of the real world. It says, someone who has been sexually abused, whether you know it or not. Isn't that the truth? Anybody that knows me knows somebody that's been sexually abused. Words cannot describe sexual abuse. Sexual abuse is not about sex. It builds survivors and steals childhoods. It is a crime, and abuse needs to be talked about by victims. It has a lifetime impact and wounds everyone. And that's the truth. So sexual abuse is a child living in fear. It steals power and trust. And so that's what they had to say about that. And then he lists a whole bunch of references and stuff here for this information, and books and whatnot. This is a great website. There's all kinds of awesome links and references and resources here. And next I want to look at child pornography, and that's sort of to do with what we're talking about. He's got a section here on child pornography. So child pornography on the internet is real child abuse. It uses real children and causes enormous damage for children and youth. The internet is a very powerful new technology for exploiting children. There is an increased demand for the product, and it uses emotional language. And these are not cyberspace children, they are children. Children used for pornography are often being groomed for further and further abuse. And it says, we need the help of technological experts to help address this form of child abuse. We need local and global education campaigns through the internet, radio, television, and newspapers to combat child abuse. We need research and information. It says here, police recovered more than 100,000 pornographic images of children as young as 2 from one U.S.-based pedophile club known as Wonderland, which exchanges pornographic pictures of children on the internet. The images they traded were like baseball cards, were of children tied up, children having sex with animals, adults or other children. Suspects include teachers, a scientist, a medical student, a scoutmaster, an accountant, and a university professor. And that was back in from 1998 from the Toronto Star. And discussion, child prostitution and child sex rings, identification, of key themes, a lack of public awareness, education, and outreach, myths about sexual abuse, sex rings, and a connection to prostitution, impact on an individual's life, the survivor's perspective, why is society in denial and how is this accomplished, how do pedophiles maintain their groups and how can they be identified, and how do they propagate these activities, right? Public messages, the reality of child sex rings and prostitution. Child sex rings and prostitution happens to children and individuals who are vulnerable, perhaps related to institutions as clients. Individuals from abusive situations are more likely to become involved in sex rings or prostitution than those who are not. That's right, because these children are already at risk, and they are quite often, if they run away or they just out on the streets, they can just become a victim really quickly. And it says when children are soliciting, and also from the parents selling them off, parents do that, sell their children into these sex rings, set clients up for their children and stuff, prostitution and whatnot. It's horrible. When children are soliciting, there is no choice. Even when adults are soliciting, there are no choices. So, impact of abuse. It says there is a lifelong impact resulting in internal, emotional, physical, and external, which is behavioral problems. Dissociative disorder is real. Memory loss from trauma is real and can be recovered both outside and inside of therapy. That exists on the part of the abused and the abuser. Number 3, myths about the impact of abuse. It says survivors have no sense of personal power and are not capable of functioning as an adult and making good choices. That's quite often, sometimes, Survivors are perceived as unable to function, and allowances are made for their dysfunction instead of a search for the cause of such dysfunction. And that's just sad, that's why I'm just one more voice out here for people to say, what, we can do it. And, we have to be proactive and we have to work on it, but it can be done. And there's no reason why we should have to suffer on in this dysfunction and this horrible life, because of what somebody put on us, you know what I mean? So I have another show, One Child Abuse Survivor to Another in the mornings, and that's what I'm dealing with, is the whole issue surrounding survivors of child abuse and what we have to go through and what so many people go through, right? Not just myself, but, not just using information that just pertains to myself. Some of it I do relate to, some of it I don't. But it's just to be one more voice out here for survivors to say, what, we deserved so much better, and we can have so much better, but we have to work at it. It's not going to necessarily fall in our laps, right? I've been waiting for it to fall in my laps for over 40 years, and, of course that didn't happen, so I had to figure it out myself that I was going to have to reach out first, right? Number 4, impact. How recovered memories affect an individual's life and life choices. A sense of predetermined fate to continue in an abused capacity. Memories played out in symbolic forms such as disease, abuse of others, or choice of an abuser as a partner, alcoholic or drug addiction, lifelong impact, right? And that's just the whole issue, a lot of times we, as survivors, have to deal with this stuff. People would say, oh, why can't you just get over it? It's like, well, how about you live in my shoes for 5 minutes? And then we'll just see how well you get over it. That's just the issue. Live in one of these abused children's shoes for 5 minutes. I don't think we could do it, right? A lot of people who haven't been there don't know. Suicidal thoughts tend to be more common among survivors, and I know that firsthand. Impact of sex rings, prostitution on survivors, a complete sense of isolation. The message to the abused child is that society itself is responsible, corrupt, and there's no out there, no safe place, no rescuer. That's right, because nobody comes to their rescue, and they just live in this horrible, horrific hell of a life, right? And then they figure, well, nobody cared, so why should I care? And so many times, it's so sad that people who have been abused, don't get help, and they deserve help. They deserve to go and get help, but they don't know that, right? And they don't trust the system. They don't trust society. They don't trust anybody. They don't even trust themselves half the time. So this is really sad. Why is society in denial, and how is this accomplished? Society is associated with the government and the media. There is profit in denial. Abusers have a vested interest in denial and comfort. You bet. Abusers want it shut down. They certainly don't want anybody coming out and talking about this because it puts them on the line. They'll either be busted for the past abuse that they did, or abusers who want to continue doing what they do want to be able to continue to do that and without getting busted. Comfort, vested interest, and both conscious and unconscious guilt. And those who have not experienced this type of trauma have difficulty in understanding higher pain. And I mean, you know what? That's true. Can you imagine being a child in a sex ring? You know? Well, unless we've been there, there's no possible way that you could, right? But that's why we have to have some empathy, sympathy, concern, not even that, but compassion. I wouldn't even say sympathy. Compassion is more the word. It's this caring, this feeling that no child should ever have to be a victim of any abuse, period, but especially child sexual abuse, and especially being a victim of a child sex ring or pornography. I mean, this is ridiculous. But all abuse hurts. So it doesn't matter. I mean, I don't sit there and say one abuse is worse than the other. All abuse hurts, and all abuse is very damaging and can kill. Abuse kills children. Whether it kills them physically, it can kill them mentally, emotionally, and every other psychologically. It's absolutely horrific. It says often those who attack survivors are often in denial about abusers and abuse. So this is the issue. There's so many people out there who, for whatever reason, don't want to acknowledge, right, survivors and validate, right, and so often, quite often in dysfunctional families, the family members won't come forward to support the other person, right? And it's just because they're in denial. They certainly don't want anybody to know about what happened to them, so they don't want anybody speaking out about the dirty family secrets, right? The whole issue is that survivors they do have a voice, but so often they don't use it. And then there's those that don't have a voice, and those people, those are the children that have been killed and murdered, and their voices are gone. But you know what? We can be their voice, and that's what I'm doing. I'm saying, you know what? I'm up, and I'm going to be a voice for every child who has ever been killed and murdered at the hands of an adult who abused them for just because they chose to do so. I'm going to be a voice for them, and I'm so happy to join all the other voices out there for these children who never got a chance to speak out, never got a chance to raise their voice. I thought, hey, I got a voice, I can raise it. You know what I mean? And so that's what I'm doing. So there are safety issues related to a lack of education on this topic. And so this is the thing. This is such a huge issue, right? Brainstorming. There is a lack of public awareness of sex rings, and there are many myths and a lack of perspective on the part of the public. Prostitution and its connections to child abuse are unclear. The myth of prostitution is that they do it because they love it. Society is in denial, offers closure without examining the underlying issues behind prostitution. And there is a lack of education around the issue of prostitution abuse in the school system at every level. It says the myth of pedophilia and child prostitution is that young boys choose to participate. That's a myth. How do pedophiles organize and sustain their activities? Does the anonymity of the Internet propagate these activities? Is a child sex ring a child used by a number of abusers? This is worse than the abuse of a child by a caregiver because no bond is formed. The child is totally isolated. His or her abuser has no power when the group. Survivors often develop strong defenses to cope and may have very high pain thresholds. And when the abuse occurs in the family environs, the memories are often more difficult to access. So memories, it says, may be triggered by specific words, and there's often a lack of acknowledgement of the abuse by the abuser. Defense mechanism develops. The child is special. The photographic aspect of this type of abuse can encourage exhibitionist behavior. And the connection between prostitution and abuse is so obvious. Why is the public surprised by it? Survivors are vulnerable and often prone to being seduced into pornography and prostitution. Survivors also often feel that they are fated to continue in an abused capacity. So that's horrible. And there's myth of suppression. So we'll have to continue with this one on Friday night, but I hope you will go check this out. www.irvingstudios.com. Or you can just type into your browser, Child Abuse Survivor Monument, and it will come up. And that's where I'm getting this information from. It's a great website. I hope you'll check it out. Check out Dreamcatchers for Abused Children. I'm the Canada Director for Dreamcatchers for Abused Children, and I'm so happy to be. Let me tell you that. www.dreamcatchersforabusedchildren.com. And Elizabeth Brawley will be on tomorrow night on Dreamcatchers Talk Radio here on Blog Talk Radio at 10 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And that's www.blogtalkradio.com /Dreamcatchers. And you can catch her show. Be sure to do that. She's awesome, and she's a very smart lady, and she's a survivor, and I'm going to be hopefully in the chat room. I try not to miss her shows. So have a great night, everybody. If you need some information or if we can help you find anything, resources or information, let us know. Dreamcatchers Children Volunteer, who actually has the logo as their official volunteer logo. Contact us or contact us here on Blog Talk Radio if you want to, or me here on my show. But have yourselves a great night, everybody, and take care of yourselves. And we'll be seeing you again. I'll be back on tomorrow morning, 6 o'clock a.m. One child abuse survivor to another. Have a great night, and talk to you soon. Bye bye.